Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. Hope you got through the whole holiday week in one piece, and that 2024 brings you all sorts of good fortune and health and fulfillment and all that stuff. For my part, I guess I did okay. We spent Christmas and a few days after that with my in-laws down in Louisiana. First time I'd seen them and the family since 2019. Things are a little less festive than I remember, but, you know, all of us are not who we were back then, if you get me. After that, once I got home, well, even down there, I took a lot of time crafting last week's monologue episode. Then, after that went up on Thursday, I really tried to take it easy around New Year's weekend, which I was more and less successful at. But now it is back to the work grind. I have a ton of stuff to take care of this week into the weekend before I head out to San Francisco next week for a big biotech investor analyst conference where I have to give a presentation and then have a bunch of meetings set up. After that, I'm going to head down to LA for a few days to see a friend, record an episode or two, probably spend my birthday alone in a city that is not one that I call real, but, maybe I'll finally get to the Getty Museum. So that'll be something. Anyway, it all means we are back in the swing of things. So let's dive into the show and kick off 2024. My guest this week is Chris Silverman. Chris is artist, graphic designer, illustrator, photographer, web designer, probably has a couple of other hyphenates. And he has an amazing project going on. It's been over 2 years since he began it, and it's called Notes Art. Hashtag lowercase NOTES, uppercase ART, Notes Art. Chris makes a wonderful, amazing, weird drawing every day and posts it on social media, which, okay, I was doing something like that when I started drawing a couple of years ago. Nothing special there, but the thing is, Chris does every one of these drawings in his iPhone's Notes app using just his finger as a stylus. And these are not just simple, teaching yourself how to draw drawings like I was up to. His art is weird and gorgeous and haunting and evocative and has this amazing use of color. Some of the hatching and cross-hatching effects he gets are just mind-blowing, especially when, once again, you have to conceive of all of this being done by finger point in the Notes app on a phone. No iPad, no computer, nothing else. Now, you long-timers have heard me quote that passage from Hegel's Elements of the Philosophy of Right, which I think I did in the last guest episode I did with Jared Ernest in December, where he paraphrases Goethe, "To be great, one must limit oneself." Now, we could throw greatness aside, whatever, but in Chris's case, the constraints he's given himself in this project they've just opened up a mind-blowing avenue for his art, knowing what he's constrained to and knowing that really beyond the technology, the limit is just his imagination and the dexterity of one finger. It's mind-blowing. And he posts every day, generally without any commentary. Like he'll put it on Instagram, just a hashtag Notes Art, and that's it. Occasionally one or two words, but really the art just speaks for itself and it speaks to the world. It's an absolutely beautiful project. So you can check out Notes Art a bunch of different ways. It's on Instagram, Mastodon, Glass, as well as his own site. It's all as C. Silverman, the letter C and the word Silverman. I'll have links to all that stuff in the show and episode notes for this one. So you will be able to check this stuff out and start subscribing or following, however you do on social media. and getting this this gift every day. Now, Chris is the brother of past and upcoming guest Jen Silverman, who connected us, figuring Chris and I would have a good conversation about art, audiences, and technology and the neat stuff that I groove on. This talk, I will be honest, takes some turns. I gab more than usual, even more than usual, open up about some stuff, and we kind of get into what it means to make something, whether it's art like Chris is making or this thing that I do. Well, anyway, I'm going to link to a blog post in the show and episode notes that Chris put up recently about what it felt like to lose steam on this project, which, like I said, just passed the 2-year anniversary recently. And what audience expectations are like and what that can do to you as an artist and how he managed to pull himself out of it. So, yes, Jen was pretty smart to set us up. Now, as caveats go, we recorded at my house, so there is the occasional reference to the awesome library that surrounds us and lots of echo from all the floor tile that's there. And one of my printers decided it would make a little noise partway through. But anyway, about an hour in, when Chris mentions the Simon Stålenhag book he's trying to remember, that's Tales from the Loop. And the Matthew Bogart graphic novel he cites near the end is Incredible Doom, not Infinite Doom. But anyway, that's pretty much all you need to know. Here's Chris's bio. Chris Silverman is a designer, artist, and illustrator living in New York's Hudson Valley. He likes traffic lights, night, faces, especially masks and skulls, UFOs, and desolate places. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Chris Silverman. So where did Notes Art begin for you? And how did it... Well, tell me where it began first, and we'll talk about how it changed over time.
That's an interesting question. I mean, with kind of major projects, there's like a tendency to assume that there was just like this one moment of epiphany where I started doing it. But it kind of evolved from just these random experiments that I'd been doing earlier. I think I'd say it began with Instagram stories. I had never really paid much attention to Instagram stories. I guess I didn't really see the point of them because, I mean, when I post stuff online, I kind of think of it as like my online portfolio, my identity. It's permanent. I put my best work up there, and so the whole idea of posting something to stories and it's gone within 24 hours, I never really got that. As
opposed to this will all go on your permanent record.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, the flip side is that if something just disappears in 24 hours, if it's not permanent, it's not part of my permanent record, there's less pressure to do something that's, I tend to have meaningful. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I tend to have perfectionist tendencies. And part of that is this sense that, there's the pressure of it's going to be up there forever. And anybody who goes back years is going to be able to see it. And so I noticed that some of the people who I knew, like Jen, for example, were posting interesting things to stories. And it kind of got me thinking about that as, I don't know, I wanted to be doing more creative things, and I noticed that I really wasn't. And the idea of doing some small creative thing every day and sharing it to stories, and, I don't have to worry about how good it is. It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be polished. It's just sort of this, simple little thing that goes up there and then it's gone. That really appealed to me. And so I was experimenting with various things on the phone, and how I think this started was, I had it's called a shortcut. It's this automation tool that comes with the iPhone, and it's really cool. It allows you to string together like different functions of different apps. So you could have a shortcut that it takes a photo, and then it automatically names the file according to the current date and saves it to your iCloud folder or whatever. So I had a shortcut where you could take I'd take a photo of like a texture, like a wall or a sidewalk or something that I wanted to draw on. And then I would use the drawing tools to draw a picture on that photo. And I was doing some interesting things with that. And I think that was kind of where Notes Art really started. Because, I mean, what caused me to switch to notes was the fact that if you're drawing something in a shortcut and the shortcut fails, everything's gone. Yeah, it's just you lost your whole drawing. Whereas if you're drawing in notes, at least everything's saved. So I'd say that was sort of the amorphous origin story of notes art. That I wanted to be doing some small, simple, creative thing, and I was experimenting with the shortcuts, and that kind of migrated to notes. And I remember it's funny. It was such a minor moment, but I can still remember it with crystal clarity. That I was just messing around in notes, and I finally drew this little, I think it was a Pac-Man figure. It was one of those little ghosts from Pac-Man. Yeah. And I just threw it together because I mean, this was the first time that I'd really done any serious sketching in notes, and I posted it on stories. And I remember thinking, man, I wonder what would happen if I did this for 2 years or 3 years. There's just, I mean, it just...
Or the rest of my life.
Or the rest of my life. I mean, it was...
Yeah.
It seemed like such an insignificant moment, and I guess I had some sort of amorphous plan to... just do it for, I don't know, as long as I wanted to do it. Just every day I would dash off something and put it in stories. And of course it didn't matter because it was just going to be gone in 24 hours. But of course, me being me, I kind of got obsessed with making them more detailed and putting more and more time into it. And, because with me, these perfectionist tendencies just kind of spiral. And I would say that most of notes art has kind of, from that point, it's evolved unintentionally. I didn't have any grand plans for it. It was just me, getting more and more interested in it and doing more and more things. And at some point, a friend of mine was like, don't just post these in stories. I mean, you put them somewhere else as well. So I started making it permanent. But that, I would say, is kind of where all of this got going.
And ended up destroying your life. I mean, giving you much more meaning in your life, right?
Yeah, both.
Yeah, in that respect, what did you notice in terms of how it changed? What sort of trends I know you now break it out in terms of, you tag things as certain types of categories, but what sort of stuff did you notice? I seem to be doing a lot more drawings of this sort of thing than I thought I would ever be doing. What did you notice about yourself, I guess?
That's an interesting question. Most of these, there's very little thought behind them.
Yeah.
I mean, they just take form. Mm-hmm. It's almost like I switch myself off and go into sort of screensaver mode, and this is what comes from that. There are certain things that, like drawing monsters, for example, or creatures. I've always been fascinated with that for some reason. Faces was another big one. Masks, I don't know. I would say generally the only real conscious part of this is I try not to draw too many of one thing in a row because I don't want people to get tired of it.
Oh, God, another one of those scaffolds. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, if I had things entirely my way, I would probably just draw a month's worth of orange masks or something because I love that color and I love that idea. So, but I do try to mix things up. But
and that's what I wonder, not in the conscious sense, but when you started to step back, when you look at a whole bunch of tiles of things, is that moment of, it looks like I draw something more than I thought I was drawing something.
I'm trying to think.
Or are you still too in the day-to-day to really, step back and kind of encompass what you've made?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any trends that have kind of emerged. I definitely draw a lot of landscapes. Again, I think because I've always been fascinated with remote places and abandoned buildings. So if I were to go back over my work, I'd probably see a lot more of that than I initially thought I was going to be drawing. But I wouldn't say that there's any particular thing that I draw more of that. When I look at it, I wouldn't say there's anything that surprises me because everything I draw is kind of consistent to something that interests me in some way.
Yeah, I get you. And the sense of giving yourself constraints, doing it in that both the geometric shape you're using, the particular set of tools you've got, making it all on the phone and not having, okay, I'll move this over to the laptop and work on X, Y, and Z, keeping everything within that same set. How important is the sense of constraint?
Do you mean
giving
conscious
yourself
constraints
limits?
Or?
Yeah, just giving yourself limits on what you're making. knowing that, for this particular project, it's going to be this every time, at least this shape. I mean, not, that there's a repetition beyond that. But
I think, I mean, a lot of constraints are imposed on me just by the medium. I mean, that's one of the things that makes this interesting is because working on the Notes app is kind of this, I mean, it is incredibly constrained. It's a very small screen. It's a pretty limited set of tools. It's a limited set of capabilities. I
showed some cartoonists your stuff at a festival, and they were like, I don't understand what he's using. It can't just be notes. I'm like, no, it's all in notes. Trust me. And I sent them videos of your stuff, so they're getting a better idea now. But yeah. Go on.
I get that reaction a lot. Like, I mean, on social media, sometimes people will ask me what I'm using because they don't.
Your finger?
Yeah, that's the reaction. I mean, they assume that it's, I'm working on an iPad with an Apple Pencil or something, and then they learn it's notes in my finger, and they're just like, how is that possible? I mean, because I think most people don't do that. But you had an interesting interview with Tom Gauld where he was talking about how, he said something that, I'm trying to remember enough to paraphrase it, but the idea was the things you're not good at shape what you do at least as much as the things that you're good at. And the example he gave was he's not good at drawing arms or complicated scenes.
That's why he's got his triangle people. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But I mean, that was something that I find beautiful about his style is it's very stark. It's very minimal. There isn't a lot going on in the scenes because, as he said, that would clutter it. He's not really good at drawing complicated scenes and interactions. And I think that in terms of limitations and constraints has kind of the nature of the Notes app has gone a long way towards shaping that aesthetic more than any conscious thing that I did. Because, I mean, one thing, in terms of arms, you might notice that a lot of the drawings that I do have creatures that don't have arms. They're just sort of these stubby figures with two legs. And the reason for that is that arms complicate things. Arms have fingers, and fingers are small details. And, when you're drawing on a phone screen with your finger, that can be hard to fit into a scene. So sometimes I will, I'll add arms if it contributes.
If it demands.
If the scene demands, exactly. But I think in terms of constraints, the real constraints for me, it's not repeating things, and it's not drawing things that are so weird that I don't think other people are going to find them interesting. For me, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is abstract art, like Ellsworth Kelly, Picasso. I mean, I've never really experimented with that in Notes art because I don't know that it would mean that much to people. It wouldn't be that interesting. These super minimal shapes and just, it's not something that really, I find it attractive, but I don't know that anybody else would really be interested in that. So for me, I'd say the constraints are more drawing things that, scenes of things, figures, objects, using bright colors, not using the same color more than twice in, 2 days. I don't know. It's more, and as you might remember, I wrote this whole blog post where I was talking about how I'm trying to not be influenced by what I think is popular and how the reception it gets.
That's what I was going to say. You just mentioned the people will get it or not get it. And that post of yours, which I'll link to when we post the episode, I'm very interested in that sense of audience expectations, how as an artist you start thinking about the audience and what they want versus what you want to make. And how that affected a phase of this project for you.
It's a really tough balance to strike. I mean, in the blog post, I was expressing a lot of frustration because I wasn't doing work that mattered to me anymore. I mean, I was so burdened by how I thought people were going to react to things or what they wanted to see that I was just, I wasn't using the colors that I wanted to use. I wasn't exploring anything. I wasn't trying different techniques. It was just sort of the same thing. So, yeah, I mean, to the degree that I think worrying about audiences was limiting my ability to explore and to do interesting work, that kind of, I had to pull back on that. But at the same time, I am kind of humbled, I would say, by the interest that people have shown in my work.
Did you have that moment where it was the holy shit, I have an audience? Do you remember that instant of it's not just my friends and family who are looking at this?
It came gradually.
Yeah.
There was definitely, I would say, a moment, but it was more like a sort of build up, where I would do things and they would get a response that honestly surprised me. I mean, it took me the longest time to even take this seriously, which is a strange thing to say, but I mean, I was doing these things as an experiment. It was just how I unwound at the end of the day. And I would post it on Instagram and I'd post it on stories, and I never thought too much about it. But I noticed that a lot of people would, like, I mean, they would interact with it. They liked it, but they would see things in it that I didn't notice or see. I remember there was like one early one where I drew this sort of, I guess it was a very somber looking scene where somebody's walking alone at sunset. And I got this concerned message from one of my friends. She's like, "Hey, are you okay? That last one was kind of grim." And I was taken aback. I was like, people are taking this seriously. I mean, for me, it was just just sort of a thing. But, yeah, I noticed, especially on social media, when I started noticing that people were sharing my work a lot and like really strongly reacting to it and just impressed by it. That it's kind of scary in a way. I mean, I'm not used to being the center of attention. I don't like being the center of attention. I have never wanted to be an influencer. So when I post something, I'd say Mastodon is probably where I get the majority of my attention right now. And yeah,
and it's not people scolding you. I'm just kidding. That's the Mastodon stereotype.
And there is absolute truth to that. I've been on Mastodon since 2017, and
you should be using this OS and
or complaints about this has a face in it. There should be a content warning on that. I mean, there is kind of the there's an element to that,
and it's all part of the whole social media world, and that the number of different platforms and the ways we interact with the virtual world, I guess.
Definitely. I mean, any place you have more than 3 people, there is going to be, some measure of, I don't know, I'm not sure what the word would be, but, the kind of thing you're describing, there's always going to be that. Mastodon, I would say, is probably the social, I mean, I don't like social media. I tend to, other than posting the daily sketch, I really don't interact much on there. But Mastodon is kind of where I do most of my interacting. And I, for the most part, I really like the culture on there. I mean, I've met very interesting people, and, I have like actual pseudo internet friendships with some of the people who follow me. But I'll say that, I mean, even now when I post something on there and it like gets shared to, I mean, a large degree, like, I don't know, 50 boosts, 75 boosts. Yeah. It's a little bit scary. It's like, my God, I mean, a lot of people are seeing this. And especially since I think I've mentioned a few times now that I have these perfectionist tendencies, I start like going back and looking at the drawing and I'm like, oh my God, is there something wrong with this? All these little details that I should have fixed and didn't. I had this panic moment recently where one of the most popular things I think I've posted recently was the Christmas scene where you got Santa Claus and the Amazon truck. And so I made this major, just stupid goof up where I got the Amazon logo backwards. Mm-hmm. Like that, typically the way it should be is the arrow head is on the right side. Yeah. It's, A to Z. It's a very clever logo. But for whatever reason, I had it backwards and I didn't even notice it. And I mean, I'm a graphic designer. I notice these things. I appreciate these things. Yeah, so when somebody on Mastodon was like, "Hey, I think the logo is the other way," I was just like, "Oh my God, she's right."
Then you could say, "I was trying not to get sued for copyright infringement or any trademark infringement. And that's why I did it backwards." See, there's always a creative way out of this stuff.
that crossed my mind. I'll admit I was thinking about that because the person who pointed out was like, "Maybe this was intentional," And I was like, but
happy accident.
Yeah, there wasn't really a way of spinning that. I was just like, I fixed it where I could. Things, and it wasn't a huge deal. I mean, most people didn't notice it, but I mean, it's sort of when there's that level of scrutiny on something you're doing, the stakes change. Like for the first maybe year of notes art, I really didn't think too much about it because nobody was watching, and now, at least by my standards, a lot of people are watching. So there's definitely an element of pressure there that wasn't there before. And I'm trying to strike a balance between, I guess I'm trying to figure out how much I should let that influence what I'm doing.
Doing this weekly is difficult.
Oh, I'm sure.
Doing the email twice a week, it can get to you. There's a degree to which we know it's self-imposed pressure, where the world's not going to end if I don't do this, but I have to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And it's a real challenge. Middle of this month, middle of December, it was rough. I was like, I got a finish line up here. I gotta just do these 2 episodes to end the year, and I will record my first one of 2024 with Chris at some point, and that means another year is going to get rolling, and 50 more episodes have to come out. But they don't have to, but we do them anyway. And yeah, there's that weird sense of duty that we give ourselves, and I don't think you don't give the vibe that it's quote unquote content. It's you're making something. You're not making content.
Oh, like in the social media influencer way of content.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's 100%. That's never what this has been.
It means something to you too, not just okay, let me get today's notes art out,
I mean, there was that blog post where it was.
You talk about that a little, but that sense of what was it? Not having your heart in it, really, just feeling like, okay, it's time to knock this out.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
It was it was a strong sense of duty without any of the joy that comes with making something that had at one point mattered to me. And I think one of the things that kind of helped me get past that was the fact that iOS 17 comes with some pretty cool stuff. I'm very cautious about upgrading, especially major version upgrades.
Do anything to break.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because things might break, apps might get redesigned. I have to relearn how things work. There's a level of potential turbulence that I try to avoid. But in this case, my dad was getting these notifications on his phone because they were trying to get him to update to iOS 17. And he asked me, I don't know, is this something I should do? Is it stable? And I was like, well, how about if I upgrade to iOS 17 first, and then I can experiment with it, and we'll see what that's like. And I'm kind of glad he brought that up, because when I upgraded, I noticed that the Notes app had some very interesting new tools, like the crayon that I've been using a lot recently. Yeah. And that really changed everything, because it's this whole new frontier now. I get to explore the capabilities of this new tool. And I get to figure out how to translate some of the effects that I want into, what's possible with the crayon. And I think that made things interesting in a way that they hadn't been before. That I just had these new capabilities, and there was something to explore again. I wasn't just sort of cranking out the same style, using the same tool, same color palette, that kind of thing. Yeah,
and it's been an interesting shift for it. You can see it again when you scroll through, 3x3 Instagram tiles, and it's this is where things start feathering and getting that color thing going.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's you could see all the crazy art supplies and shit I've piled up over here in the last 2 years, just figuring out what the hell I'm doing. I don't know if you know my whole drawing thing. I started a little while after turning 50 and just kind of have been blundering my way around through this stuff. But
you've really evolved. I was looking at your work earlier. I'm not an art critic by any means, but
God. That was the worst thing I ever did, was show art critics my stuff when we were recording. It just killed me from there on. I'm like, I can never draw again, obviously, because these people have now looked at my stuff.
Oh God.
I know.
What kind of reaction did you get?
They were fine with it. People like stuff. A couple of guys, 2 art teachers I've recorded with back to back destroyed my ability early in 2023 because they saw how thin my lines were and how it was all. They saw what should have been there, and I took that not badly. I just got too self-conscious about the art, but started playing, and like you, started finding at times that just experimenting with color turned out to be, I could get away from form and start working in color, and then start finding levels here and building something back up that way. But yeah, this is all without any real instruction of any kind, which should be relatively obvious if you look at my stuff. But but it's been it's why I wondered what you've seen in your own work, whether it's just through Notes art or your art overall, how this process and this sort of discipline of making this daily may have affected, what you make, or, what sort of art you're really pursuing. How much is Notes art your art versus, other forms and other pieces that you want to make, I guess. Which is a whole bunch of things tossed into one. So.
I'm sort of parsing that question. I mean, in terms of subject matter, I would say nothing has really changed. I mean, I'm still just, something crosses my mind, I'll do it. If there's a particular effect that I want to experiment with, I'll do it. I think what's probably changed has been my technical aptitude. Like when I go back and look at some of the really early ones that I was doing, I didn't know how to zoom in the Notes app at that point. Like essentially if you pop open Notes and you just start drawing on it, you can't zoom on that drawing. You can't the pinch to zoom, increase the size, because it's just, I don't know exactly why it's like this, but it's just, Notes just considers it sort of a drawing on the Notes surface. You can't really treat it like an image. So for the first maybe month or 2 months or something, I was just drawing at the level of magnification. Well, there wasn't any. I mean, you're just drawing directly on the screen.
1-to-1. Yeah.
Yeah. And which, I mean, it's very difficult, but it resulted in kind of this very interesting, kind of a rough woodcutty style, because I didn't have precision at that point. I wasn't familiar with the tool. I hadn't been doing it for a while. I didn't have the ability to magnify it so I could actually get in there and do little details. And then when I figured out, that if you paste an image into Notes and then draw on that, you can magnify it. That was kind of a game changer for me, because all of a sudden I had this level of precision that I hadn't had before. So that changed, I think, both the style and the kinds of things that I could draw. Because now, I mean, before, if I wanted a drawing where there's a person sitting next to a campfire and there's some little thing in the sky, that hadn't been possible because I just didn't have the precision for that. It would just look like a mess. Yeah. Whereas now that I can magnify, I mean, that opened up more possibilities as far as subject matter, because I had the ability to render details to an extent that I thought was satisfactory. And then there was another trick that I discovered where, and I don't know if this was an actual feature or a glitch, but basically there's this sequence of moves that you go through where you can essentially get much finer strokes in the Notes app than you would think is possible, like just tiny lines that is not normally accessible through the tool set. And again, I mean, that made certain things possible, because when I'm drawing eyes, like you might have noticed, I'm kind of obsessed with eyes. I'm not sure why. I always have been, but like the irises, the inner the lines on your eye. This trick that I discovered made it a lot easier to render those. So, and now of course with the new tools in iOS 17, that again, there's subject matter that I can explore now, like extensive uses of fog and atmospheric effects, just because I have a tool that, it makes that a lot easier to do than it did before. I have a feeling I've been kind of rambling, and I don't know if I answered your original question.
I think the question was that same evolving sense question and all that, but like you said, the technical aptitude took out. Do you see that reflected in your non-Notes work? Or are you picking up anything from that's translating back into either other art or your professional work?
I don't do a lot of non-Notes work in terms of art. I mean, that's kind of...
Do you want to?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. It's kind of interesting when I think about it, because the artwork that I was doing before I started on Notes was actually totally different. Yeah. It wasn't even close. It was much more... It was much more geometric and abstract. I was doing like textures in Adobe Illustrator, and it really didn't look anything like Notes, because again, it was kind of informed by the media, I'd say. Sure. The Adobe Illustrator has a tool. It's like I think it's called the Bezier pen or the curve tool or something. And it makes it possible to get these really nice like curves and smooth effects. Yeah. And so I was focusing mainly on that. The actual like representational drawing, I really wasn't doing very much of that before I started working in Notes. So I think that pretty much everything I've done artistically has been informed more by the medium I was using and just effects that I wanted to explore. I mean, I'll say that I very rarely am motivated by conveying any kind of meaning
this is my higher idea or something. Higher
idea, yeah. That's never, I mean, I know a lot of artists work like that. That's never been how I work. I mean, certainly, there are some, like in Notes, for example, I've done some things that there was like a larger meaning to it. But for the most part, I would say that it's more just I want to explore the limits of the tool that I'm using, and I want to do something that I think is interesting to look at. Yeah. There isn't any like hard, sort of more noble purpose than that.
Yeah, I was reading an interview with you and Jen and about the nature of, avoiding the overly political in notes art particularly.
Oh, yes.
Given that, their work is very, we won't say political so much as, politics oriented so much as the overall political statement of what it means to make art and to be part of the artistic process. So tell me about politics in relation to notes art and yourself, I guess, is the prompt.
I think one of the very strongly consistent aspects of notes art has been my avoidance of politics. I mean, that's been conscious. There have been a few exceptions to that. I mean, I think there was like a year ago, I drew there was an illustration of Putin as Humpty Dumpty sitting on a wall. I mean, it was not really a complimentary drawing, but mostly I don't even go near that.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I feel so saturated by it. And especially on social media where I'm posting these, it's just like it's a torrent of it. That's all that there is.
Yeah.
And in your interview with Matt Bors, he said something that resonated with me. He was talking about what it was like to be a political cartoonist during the Trump years when everything was getting really bad. And he had some very colorful, he said it was like sticking your head in a sewage pipe that's just like spouting 24/7. And And it totally resonated with me because that was one of the reasons why up until notes art, I had pretty much cut off social media and the news. I mean, I didn't want to know about it. I didn't want to be immersed in it. And that of course, I mean, that was following years of this doom scrolling habit that I have where I would go to, the New York Times and the Washington Post and social media. And I was just kind of immersed in all this badness and toxicity. And so for me, notes was going to be, I wasn't going to talk about it. And I saw notes as kind of being, I don't know, maybe a refuge for people who follow me and don't want to see a lot of political talk and
there are
memes
enough other
stuff.
things they can follow. I mean, even on Instagram itself, I'm connected with a bunch of editorial cartoonists. And if you want that, Steve Brodner and Edel Rodriguez and all these guys will provide it. But it doesn't have to be 100% of your feed, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's kind of tough because I love political cartoons. I mean, I've been fascinated with those for years. And sometimes, I mean, like on, I think Politico, they have like a weekly, this week in cartoons. And sometimes I'll still look at that. But beyond that, I mean, there's enough of that going around. And I that's something that I really do not want to be infiltrating notes.
Yeah. Do you find, what influences notes? I know you've got, we'll talk about your artistic influences, the overarching ones separately, but what sort of things do you find permeating notes, or do you find it mainly self-generated and cut off? Where do you get your ideas from is the worst goddamn question in the world. But, what do you see, notes art gestating or coming up from?
I have a lot of weird fascinations that I think play into that. Mm-hmm. Traffic lights is a big one. For some reason, I've always been fascinated with traffic signals, faces.
This town, by the way, I've been here 52 years. We have one traffic light, and we only added that like 15 years ago.
Oh, really? This is like the proverbial one traffic light town. That's funny. I don't know why I've been. I think as a designer, I've always been fascinated with ways of interacting with technology and user interfaces, and traffic signals and lights are kind of the user interface for the road, which is why I've always, I don't know, for ever since I was a little kid, I've just been struck with it. And there was a whole series of notes drawings that I did a while ago where it was traffic lights as human figures and wearing clothes and walking their dogs. And so things like that, abandoned buildings. That's another thing that I've been fascinated with. I mean, I'd say where I get my ideas from is really just this soup of my strange obsessions and habits, and I don't know. I think my background might have something to do with that. Well, I mean, both my parents are Harvard-educated scientists. One of my earliest memories as a kid is going, excuse me, to my dad's physics lab, And of course, that there was all sorts of scientific apparatus and control panels and machines and everything. And for some reason, I find that fascinating, like the complexities of circuitry and mechanics. And that, again, is something that I've experimented with a fair amount in notes art, just sort of like these control panels and people inside machines and that sort of thing. I'd say another thing is also fakery, the sense of having an identity that is not your own, either intentionally or unintentionally. I have always been fascinated by imposters, people who assume some sort of identity for ulterior motives. And I think...
do yourself a favor, by the way. Go back and listen to the Walter Kern episode from 2015 where we talked about the memoir he put out about his experiences with Clark Rockefeller, who was one of the great imposters of our 20th century or 21st century. Yeah, that guy.
I don't think I heard the specific podcast you're referring to, but I heard an episode about Clark Rockefeller.
Yeah. Blood Will Out is the book that Walter wrote about his relationship with the idea being Walter was this great novelist who had no idea that this guy who he was pals with was an absolute imposter. Just everything about him was completely false. Never occurred to him, and they drifted apart or were separated because Clark, and he did this to a friend of mine also, probably said something in front of Walter that he realized may have given him away. So he basically cut Walter out of his life. Walter never figured out what this clue may have been. And then years later discovers the guy was an imposter and a murderer. It's really something. So anyway.
No, that's the part that I remember is that he actually, I think he killed at least one person.
Killed his landlord and I think the landlord's son in his real identity before he became Clark Rockefeller, when he was just a German national living out in California. Yeah, it's he got busted when he and his wife were splitting, and he kidnapped their child, and the FBI showed up and
that's right.
Basically told the wife, "Your husband doesn't exist." Yeah. So as imposters and frauds go, that's one of the greats of this century. Just make yourself up whole cloth, I guess.
That's a pretty spectacular one. Frank Abagnale was another one who I was kind of fascinated with, because again, I mean, he really just invented these various identities as needed. And what I think really impressed me was just the fluidity with which he went from one to another. I guess I think one of the reasons I'm interested in that is because I find it, I don't know, very difficult to be anything other than what I am.
I can't lie to save my life. I can't imagine somebody doing that as like the background of everything.
Actually being exhilarated by that. I mean,
if I have to hold something back, I get worried. Much less actually say something false. It's Anyway, so imposters have always been a fascination for you.
They really have. Yeah. I think also because to some degree I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm sometimes haunted by the possibility that I might be faking things to some degree. I don't want to be perceived as being disingenuous, and so I don't know. It's hard to explain, but this kind of sense of wearing a costume, wearing a mask, putting your game face on, to some degree is something we all have to do, but it's something that I've never been comfortable with, and that's kind of, I would say, a recurring theme in the notes drawings, because there's, I don't know, just the idea of wearing this identity to get by in society or to accomplish some particular objective that you have. It's, I don't know, it's fascinating to me in a dark sort of way.
Yeah. Do you feel you have a notes art persona?
Definitely.
That you become somebody when you're doing those drawings?
Yeah.
Because you don't comment, you don't leave a big text thing, you don't have a verbal presence with the drawings. It's really much more. What is that self like, I guess? And do you feel yourself entering it as you start working on them?
Very much so, yeah. I mean, I would say that it's kind of maybe more of a lack of self than an actual self. Yeah. I mean, social media being social media, I've been online for over half my life at this point, and I'm very familiar with online cultures of all sorts. And, I've seen how being too much of one thing it can work both ways. I mean, you draw people in who are attracted to that, but it can also result in extreme reactions from other people who maybe don't like that. So, I mean, I would say my notes art persona, if there is one, is kind of being, very cautious, very polite. I just, partly it's because I don't want to be one of these eternally online people who sounds and acts like that.
Yeah.
And also I have this purely selfish, idealistic desire that people should be nicer online. So, when I'm interacting with people who comment, people who, show interest in my work, I mean, I try to be just sort of polite and, engage with them. I don't know how different that is from my actual persona. I mean, I think to some degree, everything we are is kind of subsets of everything we are, but I would say there's definitely kind of a sense of putting on like my notes art, suit when I'm doing this and posting things, interacting with people.
Do you put a time constraint on the drawings?
A very loose one. I would say my average, I like to get them done in around 2 hours. If something is taking more than 2 hours, then I start reevaluating what I'm trying to do.
Oh, just the drawing. Okay.
No, that's always going on in the background. That's not a.
What the hell am I doing?
Yeah. No, it's more just, what am I trying to draw here? Is this working? Am I sinking in a lot of time to try to get something to work that isn't going to work? That type of thing. But I would say just sort of a general, in the vicinity of 2 hours is when I like to get these done.
Is undo your friend or enemy?
Very much so. Well, more my friend than enemy. And that was something that I actually, iOS 17 made that a lot easier. It used to be that when I'd be drawing on one of the notes art things, and when you tap save and then exit the drawing, you couldn't go back and then
undo anything from that point.
Sorry. Exactly. Yeah. That's basically, it would just sort of flatten everything. Whereas now in iOS 17, it doesn't remember the undo states, but it remembers every line you put down as an individual object. So if I could save something and then I want to go back and remove something, there to a certain limited degree, I can do that. And that actually, that is definitely a lifesaver, because there have been so many times where I went heavily down one road or another, and before realizing that I didn't like where it was going.
Yeah. It
wasn't working. And, I'm able to back out of that and kind of re-engineer it.
See, for me, destruction is my métier. Everything's on paper and there's no going back for most of these. I didn't use an eraser for the first 7 or 8 months of drawing, because I just figured, still figuring it out. This isn't going on a wall anywhere. I may as well just keep drawing my way out of this. But,
That's the hardcore way of doing it. And I mean, I grew up drawing like that. I mean, notes art, as I said, it's this is the first time in a while that I've drawn anything representational. But when I was a kid, I mean, pretty much everything I drew was with pen and pencil, and it was like these very representational things. And I remember just this sense of abject terror that I would feel every time I got halfway through a drawing, because there's no going back, and you kind of have to make a decision. It's like, speak now or forever hold your peace, depending on which direction you're going in.
So, there are ones that took me weeks to finish. There are things I would pencil, and then it was I got to ink this at some point, and I'm really going to screw this up. But, and getting over myself and realizing, once again, it's not going in a gallery. It's just a guy sitting at a table. But
there's a lot of, there are ways of taking the pressure off. Yeah. But I guess, especially for me, I think I don't like making mistakes.
Sure.
And especially if I've put a lot of time into something, I don't really want to possibly destroy everything in the space of a minute or 2 minutes just by making the wrong decision.
And getting frustrated by it and then losing your balance or control.
Yeah. Exactly. I think there's arguments to be made in both cases. I mean, that whole necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, I've seen some good things happen from making a mistake and then trying to fix that mistake and taking it in a different direction. And when you're working with something immutable like pen or pencil, innovation is possible if you're open to it. But I think what I really like about having the ability to fix things and work in an environment where I can go back or duplicate a drawing, it makes it possible to experiment and explore in ways that wouldn't be possible if I was working with physical media. And I'll do that. I mean, if I'm working on a notes piece and I'm halfway through it and it's like, well, it could go one way or it could go another, I can just copy it. Yeah. I make a copy of it and then try different things. And I think especially for the way I work in notes art, that's really possible. That's really important because so much of, it's funny, like when people react strongly to a drawing, a lot of times the detail they're reacting to, like, a person standing in the middle of a forest or, somebody holding a sign or, something that looks like it's meaningful. That happened in maybe the last 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the drawing. It's like I had a drawing and I was like, oh, what if I I know. It's just, it's just spur of the moment, random thing. And the whole reason I'm comfortable making decisions like that is because I know that I have a copy somewhere, and if it goes wrong, I can just undo it. And I feel like if I didn't have that option, I would probably be a lot less likely to explore, and there would just be more of this sort of more imposed constraints.
Do you have any, well, for me, there's always this episode's going to get a lot of people interested, and then crickets. And then I'm interested in this guy, but I don't think anyone else is going to be, and it turns into the one that gets all the praise. I stopped looking at my download numbers a couple of years ago, but before then it was always the guest I think is going to be huge, just doesn't go anywhere. And, some guy, I'm like, a book on biblical catastrophism? I mean, sure, I want to find out about this, but for God's sake, I don't know who else will. And just everybody downloads. Do you get that sense of, well, I don't know if this one's going to go well, but, people just end up, you get all the likes basically, which I know is a horrible way of gauging how good a piece of art is, but how appealing it is, I guess.
Those are the metrics. I mean, I think I mentioned that in that blog post, that it's really, one of the very, very motivating and very difficult ways of working primarily on social media is, you can see in real time right in front of you whether something is popular or not and who liked it. And I've definitely had those experiences. I think pretty much all the time where I'll do something and I either think it's absolute garbage and then it gets reboosted a whole bunch of times, or I think, oh, this is pretty good. And then it's just like, nobody likes it. Yeah. So, and as I said, that's one of these things that I'm trying to have that matter less to me. Like, I don't want to get to the point where I'm going to draw something that I think is interesting. And it's like, oh, well, the last time I did this, it only got, 25 likes or whatever. And then I don't do it because my internet audience doesn't like it. That's something that I would like to minimize in kind of the calculus that I do.
It's tough when it's social media based. Like for me to look at the stats for the podcast means I have to take a number of steps through the podcast hosting site's stats feature. For you, it's so clearly, there on Mastodon or there on Instagram. The moment you check in, you're going to see, 175 of this and that and the other. And it's like, there's no way to, gloss over it outside of not logging in at all, which we should all do more often.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's still real difficult in this day and age.
No, stats are difficult. Like I said, they can be very motivating. They can be very depressing. Jen said something that they never read the reviews of their work. Yeah. And I don't know. I was always really, that to me was like the ultimate power move where you just do what you want to do and you don't worry too much about what the critics said about it. I would like to get to that point where I can work like that.
It's tough. Again, just the venue through which you show the art is one that, the stats are right up in front of you. I forget, it was one of the platforms was going to disable likes or showing likes on people's posts. I think it may have been Twitter before Musk bought it. I think you would still be able to see for your own, but same thing, you would have to actually click through and click the analytics button to see, how a post had done with that idea of disincentivizing the, I'm going to do things to get people to click, instead of I'm going to post something that I actually care about and not worry about what the metric is. Then they discovered that advertisers would not be happy, I guess.
Well, that's the problem with places like Twitter is that, pretty much everything they do is shaped more by
engagement.
Exactly. That's a very interesting idea. One of the the social media platforms that I'm on. It's called Glass.
I was on that when it first launched, but I don't post photography enough to use it. I saw your gallery there, and it's such a wonderful interface, or a way of showing stuff. But anyway, go on.
It really is. It's I mean, that one of the things that I like about Glass is it's well designed. It's what Instagram should be, I think, if Instagram wasn't, run by by Meta.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I like about Glass is, at least as far as I know, it's not possible to see how many followers somebody has. Like, I don't think I even know how many followers I have on there. But if you're looking at somebody else's profile, I mean, you can see their work, you can see comments, but you don't see whether they have 1,000 followers or 100 followers or something like that. And I think that's such a good idea. You'll never see anybody from Meta actually do that, because the whole nature is
building
about
a critical mass and influencers.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, that number next to your profile, that matters. That's why you're on there. But and I'll admit that matters to me as well. I mean, I try not to have that hang too heavy in my mind, but for reasons that I'm sure you're aware of it, I think it just kind of breeds this mentality that isn't healthy. I mean, that's when you get people posting things just for the sake of posting it and buying followers. And there's this real sort of like elitism, I think, where if somebody has, 300 followers, maybe you treat them like crap, but if they have 3,000 followers, then you're nice to them. And I mentioned that part of my notes art. Well, I wouldn't call this a persona, but I mean, something that when I'm interacting with people, I mean, I don't even look at how many followers they have. If they like my work, I respond to them. I kind of think that's important. I really don't want to get into this influencer style mindset where it's just all about numbers and not about people.
So instead of influencers, tell me about your influences.
That's an interesting question.
I do have the big Bill Watterson collection over there. I know he's among your he's behind the Chris Ware.
I think I think I even have that. It's like the hardbound 3-volume. Yeah, I got that one. Yeah. I mean, Watterson is definitely up there. Yeah. He is probably one of the best newspaper cartoonists I can think of. I mean, what he did with that medium was just, I don't think anybody, I've heard that he was influenced by Crazy Cat. I've never read that strip. I think it was from the 20s or 30s, but
that's the blue spine over there, and the two books under that are more Crazy Cats. But anyway,
wow.
that's
yeah.
I'll give you a whole comics education after this, but no need to be pedantic now.
No, I'm looking.
I can be pedantic all the other times.
I want to have a look at that. I'm curious about that. Definitely Watterson. Tove Jansson is another strong influence of mine. I don't know if you've heard of her.
The
Moomins, yes, exactly. I'm always surprised when people know who she is, because here in in Finland and Japan, it's kind of she's like Disney over there. It's this sort of this, everybody knows who the Moomins are. The United States generally you don't find a lot of people
somehow. But Drawn and Quarterly up in Canada started issuing a bunch of years ago. They started putting out all the Moomin books or collections, and that turned into among comics cognoscenti, it turned into a movement. And then it turned out there were people who, I was reading that when I was 5 years old, and you discovered. Yeah, so it's weird. But that is one that in the US we just kind of missed.
Were they publishing the Moomin comics or the Moomin books?
Comics, and I think prose of hers also, the illustrated prose too. And then there's her prose by itself, but
Okay.
But yeah. Again, I'm sure there are collections here somewhere, but as you can tell, my library's gotten a little too crowded.
Somewhere in here.
Yeah.
That's actually the interesting thing is I didn't know that she drew a comic strip until relatively recently. I mean, my mom somehow knew about her books. I'm not sure where she got them, but I mean, my earliest memory of Tove Jansson is like my mom reading the books to me and Jen, and it was more her illustration style in those books that has stuck with me, because it's very just, I guess, Scandinavian in some way. It's very stark, very line heavy. And it kind of varies. I mean, she'll have these tiny little accent illustrations, like just little doodles pretty much. But I mean, every line counts. Like, you can tell that she just dashed it off, but it's like super evocative. It's just really, I don't know. They're kind of like icons almost. And then she'll have a full page illustration where it's like in Moominland Midwinter, there are these illustrations she did of the Moomins in the characters in the snow on a moonlit night. And there's just like the rays of the moon streaming down. It's just, I mean, it's really, I always thought it was beautiful, and it lends itself, I think, very strongly to the way I work in notes art, which is also very line heavy. Trying to think of Simon Stalenhag. He's another one.
Yeah. Don't know him.
He did God, I was about to say Tales of the City. Oh man, this is going to bug me. This is how my mind works. I remember things, I don't remember data. So
no worries. We'll look it up after. I'll put it in the show notes.
What was it? Tales of the something or Tales of... All right. We're going to have to look this one up. Yeah. But essentially the aesthetic, he did an art book. It was a collection of paintings set in this kind of weird alternate Sweden where it's this mix of like 1980s technology and scenes and then robots and robot craft from, the future. And each one of these paintings had kind of a little story attached to it, just like it was almost like, I don't know, it ran like a scrapbook where there were just these paintings of scenes, and there's, the narrator is talking about, me and my friends, we were out in the woods and we found this, this weird thing. And it's like the remains of a clearly from the future type robot technology. And it's very, very quirky, very surreal. And that had a lot of impact on how I draw these because, I told you, I've always been fascinated with technology, robots in particular, and that kind of weird mixture of just like the future and the present. I when I'm drawing these things, I don't typically have a specific artist in mind, but I definitely, when I look at his work,
they're all in the back or in the substrate, I guess. Yeah. Where'd art start for you? Before
it's
you can
always
remember.
Been here. It's always been here. From probably my earliest, I don't know. It's hard to even say. I've always been drawing. I've always been fascinated with visual things. My mom in particular has always had a strong fascination and aptitude for visual art. Some of my earliest memories are, we would go to an art store in Paris because we traveled in Europe a lot when I was a kid. And she would buy like chalk paint or chalk crayons and just, everything, these various forms of media that she wanted to experiment with. And she would do these beautiful drawings of like natural scenes, like animals or and she would like textures from lichens and the rings of a tree trunk. And that influenced me a lot, I think. Like seeing, I don't know. I remember being like 5 or 6 years old and wanting to be able to draw like that. So I think that kind of had a major impact just on, keeping me interested in art. And of course, my parents always strongly encouraged my artistic abilities. Anything that I needed, they made sure that I had it. So I think, I'm probably genetically predisposed to be interested in art, but I think my family background had a lot to do with me actually recognizing that as something that was worth doing, worth caring about.
It wasn't a frivolous.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's always a knock that, it was every kid drew and then most kids stopped. And,
yeah. And I think because a lot of times they just, they'll draw a drawing and their parents are just, oh, that's nice, dear. But I've heard stories about parents just like throwing away the entire box of like, drawings that their kids made for them as a card or something, and they just toss it. And I think that's especially notable. My parents are scientists, so they've always been kind of more focused on like science and engineering, but they have always recognized the importance of art and culture, and they always encouraged me, even when I was just like drawing, doodles on a piece of paper, that they were just, they always made me feel like that was worth doing. That was something that was important. So I think that, like I said, I think that kind of had a lot to do with, me actually sticking with this as opposed to just drawing things and then stopping because people told me it was stupid or pointless.
Did you go to art school?
No.
Good move.
That's what I thought at the time.
Yeah.
I went to Trinity College. It's a liberal, well, you probably know where that is, liberal arts college in Hartford, Connecticut. And I majored in studio arts there. It's funny. I remember being hesitant about doing that because one of my very sort of strong points of pride was that nobody had taught me how to draw. I mean, I learned a lot from watching my mom or from reading books, but I mean, I didn't have anybody leaning over my shoulder being like, oh, you need to do it this way. And I didn't like the idea of having a formal arts education and then having to worry that what I was doing wasn't really my own, that I was drawing in, the way that I was told to draw by somebody else. And I think for the most part, it really wasn't like that. I mean, I had good professors at Trinity. I don't feel like, I mean, ultimately the work that I do is mine. I learned some, important things from that. But I would say in general, what I'm doing now is more informed and supported by my own interests and my own work rather than any kind of formal instruction.
And do you find a style? Did you have a moment where you felt like this is the Chris Silverman style, or do you feel that it's, well, again, tell me, what do you consider to be a style for yourself?
I've always wanted to have a style, and I never felt like I had one. Yeah.
I think you mentioned that in an interview when I was reading up, but I wonder again how much you feel, not in terms of the content, but is there a look, a style, something?
I've never been able to pin myself down to anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the notes art style kind of comes from the medium that I'm working within. It's funny because if you ask other people who know me, they probably, like I've heard before that people clearly think I have at least one style. I mean, when I draw something, they say that they would know it anywhere, even if my name wasn't on it, they would know that I drew it. So I think I probably do have like a style or a range of styles, and I just don't see them because I'm like standing in the middle of it rather than standing outside it. But I'm very scattered, and I've always been interested in a very wide range of things. I've always really enjoyed experimenting. And I think all of that together has kind of meant that I don't really have one way of doing things because that would just be limiting.
Sure.
And I mean, there are areas where that's kind of a problem. I mean, I was really interested in doing editorial illustration at one point, and I was reading up on what it takes to succeed in that field. And what I kept reading again and again was you have to have a style because clients want to know what they're getting. I mean, they want to know how what you do would fit into the art direction of the article or the magazine they're working with. And so I consciously developed a style for that. I mean, that was sort of an engineering project where I sat down and I was like, okay, this is what I care about. These are the effects and aesthetics that I like. And it was like developing a brand. I mean, I came up with a visual editorial illustration style in that moment. But I would say in general, I don't have a style and I don't really worry about having one.
Which is for the best. Again, we know what the notes art pieces look like, but they are not the totality of you, as we know from our imposter syndrome and our masks and everything else.
Yeah. No, that's the interesting thing. I mean, it really is kind of it's this very distinctive. I mean, there is a notes art style. It's very distinctive, but I'd say it's more of a subset of what I can do.
And the work's been exhibited, right? Was it digitally or were they printing and tell me about exhibiting your work is a better way of putting it.
Well, I had an exhibit before notes art. Yeah. I haven't had a lot of exhibits, mainly because I haven't really put a lot of effort into, I mean, you have to kind of pound the pavement and I don't know.
That becomes the art world.
Very much so. Yeah. And that's something I've never been good at. I don't know, like marketing and self-promotion is it's one of these things that just gives me the willies. So I haven't really emphasized that. But I had a small exhibit at Vassar College where I work in, I think it was 2020. Notes art, there was an online exhibition of it, the Gallery AFM in Sweden. That was, I think, 2021, where they selected about 15 works. And the idea was it was on their website and they had sort of a virtual exhibition and you could order them. But other than that, I haven't exhibited anywhere yet. I would very much like to. I have like, I think it's 752 of these at this point. So yeah, it's been, it's fun. I noticed only like a couple days ago that the two-year anniversary of Notes Art came and went. And I didn't even notice it.
That's the first year. You do the big video and all that stuff. And the second year, whatever, I got another one to do. I got to get this one out tomorrow.
It's that registered on me. It was just like, wow. I mean, like the first year, hitting that year, that was a big deal for me because I haven't stuck to anything with that kind of consistency.
Not just art, but do you find yourself, particularly disciplined or able to work in a routine like this before this project?
Not at all. Not at all. It was just, I don't know. I wasn't particularly organized, and there wasn't anything that really fascinated me. And I guess it felt very limiting somehow, like just finding one thing and sticking to it. That wasn't really how I functioned.
But not even with art. I mean, exercise or whatever. Were you ever somebody who could focus and have a routine in life, or was it just office and then I'm out of the office and I'm just going to do my thing?
I have routines. Yeah. None of them are intentional. Okay. There's a word for, and I'm trying to think what it is. You see this sometimes where there's like an architectural, like, a park or something where they have these carefully laid out paths that the designers of the park thought were important. And then you start to see these other, like,
worn through by people going to the other places.
Because people form their own paths. I mean, there's sort of this organic process of, paths get formed, but it's more according to need and, just sort of optimization. And I'd say what habits I have are a lot more like those kind of organically formed paths. Sticking to routines has always been kind of a difficult thing for me. And that was actually one of the reasons why I think I stuck with Notes Art for as long as I did, is because I noticed that it was so easy. I probably couldn't tell you what I did a day ago or 2 days ago. I mean, things just blur by and you focus on little things in front of you. And I just noticed that, time was going by and I didn't feel like I was doing anything creative and I didn't have anything to show for it. And there wasn't any kind of consistent process where I was putting things into the world. And with Notes Art, even if I have a week where it's just an absolute, I'm just doing boring things that have to get done. At the end of that week, I have 7 artworks and that's something. And now I have over 750 artworks. And that is mind boggling to me, because the idea that I could have stuck with this for that long and accumulated that kind of body of work, I never would have thought I was capable of that.
So 2 things strike me around that, because we mentioned your age before, and it hits me that you probably turned 40 the same year you started this project.
That's an interesting point.
And it was mid to late pandemia. You start December 21, so we've got vaccines. We're back out in the world. But do you feel like either of those things, the obvious midlife aspect of turning 40 and just the weight of the pandemic, factor in at all, even not even consciously, but do you see those as contributors to, I need to make some form of art that's going to keep going and
that's
keep
me
going?
Very interesting question. And because the correlations are kind of obvious in some ways. My initial response to that is no.
That's silly, Gil. Why would you bring up something like, wait a second?
No, you have to wonder. I mean,
that's why we have these conversations instead of sitting in our own heads. See?
No, that's yeah. This is one of these things that I find really interesting about talking about Notes Art, is because for me, it's really, it's primarily a subconscious process. I mean, I got into the habit of doing it. I hate to sound impersonal, but there's something very close to autopilot about it at this point. I do it, I enjoy it, but I don't think too much about it. But when we talk about it, I mean, it really does kind of raise the question of, how these external influences affected me. I don't know that they did. I mean, I know that when I was in my mid-30s, I was like really worried, like just obsessed about time going by and not doing anything. And, for whatever reason, I don't know, I was really kind of stuck on that. Having turned 40, I guess I don't think about it as much anymore. Like there isn't kind of this fear of, getting everything done, in the time I have left. I mean, Notes Art was more about, I felt like I was wasting my life, but I wasn't thinking in sort of the larger arc of, oh my God, I'm 40, I'm wasting my life. It was more just, I want to make sure that even as chaotic and busy as I am, I get things done. As far as the role the pandemic played in that, again, it was very strongly on my mind. You couldn't avoid it. But I think in some degree I wasn't affected by it as much as other people were, because I mean, for one thing, I'm very lucky in that I'm able to work remotely. I mean, Vassar was fully remote at that point. But the other thing is that I really, I've always been very introverted. It wasn't like I had this burgeoning social life that got cut off when everything shut down. It was, things didn't, on a day-to-day level, things didn't really change. So again, I mean, I'm sure it was knocking around in there somewhere, but I don't know that that actually had a defining impact on, like,
a push.
Yeah.
Understood. There are a lot of factors that hit us that we don't know, or, we're not able to step back and see because we're stuck in our own heads.
That right there, I mean, that's what makes all this tricky is I'm answering questions according to what's consciously up here. But I mean, the process of making art, I think, is very subconscious.
To me, the great joy of taking up drawing was sitting out there, looking at those trees and drawing them and realizing all the voices were gone. It was just the eye and the hand. There was nothing. Everything that's constantly buzzing in my head went away when I would just be sitting there trying to figure out how to render bark.
Wow.
And the shadows of branches. And again, keep in mind, I'm starting as a 50-year-old, so I'm not somebody who has this inculcated as a kid. But yeah, the disconnect of the brain was the absolute best part of it for me. So once I started doing more work in the house, looking at screens, trying to draw something, became a little different. I became more, conscious of what I was doing. But yeah, the early days, those first few months, it was like, oh, this is the whole Zen thing that artists have. This is great,
I wish I could do that.
Yeah. Some of my cartooning pals tell me that's what they get, especially when it's something they're enjoying working on as opposed to like a deadline job they have to knock out. But you were about to say. Oh,
no. I mean, I always have voices in my head.
Yeah.
No matter what I'm doing. Working on notes art, I mean, to some degree, sometimes it calms me down, but I think the subconscious aspect of it means that, since I don't have to focus on doing it, it doesn't really distract me from everything else that's going on up there all the time.
Interesting.
So the idea of actually having something that clears your mind, I mean, that that sounds idyllic to me.
You want to go out and try and draw the trees after this? Feel free. I'm just kidding. But yeah, they were my reason for. In fact, when you mentioned your mom and the lichen, the reason I took up drawing was to try to figure out how to render what the lichen looked like here after the rain, and the tree is the bark of the tree has gone dark, and that vivid pale green that they strike. I'm not sure if you could see it with the way the trees have dried out after last night's rain, but yeah, that's. We all find our reasons somewhere for this stuff, I guess, or at least our conscious reasons, as opposed to the things that are driving us underneath.
That's interesting that you mentioned trying to draw, like, convey a certain effect, because I think, like, I take a lot of photos, and one of my very strong frustrations with taking photos is that I can never capture something about a scene that fascinates me. Like, if there's
the
like
lens
a scene,
flattens everything. Oh, go on.
No, it totally does. I mean, it's, just the act. I mean, if I were like a real photographer and I actually understood photographic technology, I'm sure I would have lenses and I would have cameras that can really, I mean, I being on glass, I see what professional photographers can do and what they can achieve. It's just that I can't achieve that. I mean, if I'm, the power of seeing the sun coming through the clouds on a foggy day or a rainbow, I mean, I can take 1,000 photos of it and it's not going to capture what was there. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I do like doing in notes art is I can draw things that I can't photograph, like a scene where there's, heavy fog or the sun filtering through the clouds or something. I mean, I can convey that in, the notes medium to a degree that I can't do with the camera. So it kind of struck me that you're trying to do this with drawing, because, I mean, again, the obvious answer would be if you want to capture that, just take a photo of it. But you could take a photo of it and it's not going to look like the actual thing.
It doesn't mean anything. It's the same as people doing this AI art and thinking it's, we're replacing artists. I'm like, no, you're just making half-assed prompts into an engine, but you do you. But yeah, we can rattle on about that quite extensively. But But Jen did tell me I should ask you about the photography because it matters a lot to them, what you've done with photography and what it's meant to you as a medium.
I need to get back to that. Yeah. There was a time when I was taking a lot of photos, and I guess I haven't as much anymore just because I haven't really been getting out as much as I did. I mean, for me, again, it was always about capturing something that was interesting to me. It wasn't, I think the mindset that I have when I'm taking photos is very similar to that of notes art, in that it's kind of a subconscious thing. I just see something on the fly and I'm like, oh, that's cool. You know, it's a sticker on a wall, or, you know, some tiny detail. I mean, a lot of the photos that I've taken, I'd say the vast majority of the photos I've taken are of tiny details, like things on the ground, like, you know, gum that somebody spat out and 20 people have walked over it. I mean, it sounds disgusting, and it is disgusting, but there's also something that's kind of beautiful about, like, if you see that gum right after a rain and it has this texture and, you know, this sort of really just aesthetic to it, that I mean, that's the kind of thing that I took photos of when I was taking photos. And I don't know, that's one of these things, again, that I think the people who know me take that a lot more seriously than I do. I only started taking it seriously after Jen saw my work and told me what it meant to them. And again, it was kind of this moment of, oh my God, I mean, I was just doing this thing that, you know, it just mattered to me. It was just something that I thought was interesting. But people are seeing these meaning in it that it never even occurred to me. And I wonder, because I've noticed that in notes as well. Like, sometimes I'll do a drawing in notes, and when I take a look back at it, I notice that I do it in a particular way. Like, there's a certain symmetry to it that I hadn't intended. So we were talking about the subconscious. I really do believe that I'm guided by some sort of underlying logic that I can't access, that there is something there. I just don't know about it. And the only time I can see how it's functioning is kind of when it shows up in front of me.
And sometimes these episodes turn into therapy sessions, but I'm not going to push that too far. I've already done the turning 40 and pandemia stuff. So, you know, we'll leave that aside. But yeah, I do wonder, as, you know, even if you want to treat it in terms of data, you know, as a sample set of 750 drawings comes up, you start to see things. That's why I asked early on about that sense of how it's evolved or what trends you've seen within it. But again, so many things we can't see because it's us. You know, it's in our own head. We need somebody on the outside to see. Joel raises the question, which I didn't want to ask, you know, for fear of putting you on the spot, but do you see an end point to the project?
I think about that sometimes.
I mean, people ask me the same thing about this, so, you know, I won't put you on the spot too much, but yeah, do you see it as there a culmination, or is it just it'll stop when it stops?
There's a good chance that the end point of this project will be when I'm in the ground. I mean, it could easily go on for decades, but the short answer is no. I mean, I don't have any plans to discontinue this at this time, because it's given me a sense of structure and purpose that very little that I've done has. So even though it's kind of this, you know, major thing for me, and it takes a lot of time, I think I plan to stick with that for the foreseeable future. But there is the fact that notes art kind of ate everything else that I was doing. I mean, a lot of the creative time that I might put towards other things goes into making these and managing the website. And so sometimes I wonder if, you know, at some point I might change the schedule a bit and do it maybe on a, you know, bi-weekly basis instead of a daily basis. But sure, the short answer to that question is for the foreseeable future, I'm going to be sticking with it.
Let's say the sacred duty aspect of it becomes a, you know, we'll say a self-fulfilling prophecy for weirdos like us. Where we just have to keep going. It's something I joked about in the weekly email, or the semi-weekly email that I put out. But actually it was true. After my last oncology appointment, my numbers came in fine. I don't need to start treatment or anything. But I had this moment later that day of, you know, it would have been nice, I guess, maybe if it wasn't serious, but serious enough that I could say, I've got to put the podcast on hold and I have to do this and that. And then I thought, you know, Gil, you can just stop anytime.
You know? If you're finding excuses to, like, give yourself a break, maybe you actually need a break.
Yeah, not actually going into treatment for cancer. That's one of those, like, you know, no, you can actually stage down from that and just say, I need a week or two off. But I still managed 50 episodes last year, so that's
grueling.
It's work. The funny thing was the week off final episode turned into an hour-long monologue that I wrote over 3 straight days and edited. But you can listen to that on the drive home, the one that came out this week.
That was very powerful.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
thanks.
That was pretty difficult to listen to, actually. I mean, I spend an inordinate amount of my life preoccupied with death, which is maybe not something that I should be admitting, but it's there. Please. I mean, it's always been there.
This is what we're here to do.
Yeah.
Tell me.
And I don't know. Hearing somebody else's story about grief and loss, on the one hand, I think it's very important because it gives me a sense of how to cope with that. But at the same time, it's, I think I've always been kind of predisposed towards dark thinking. I'm not entirely sure why. I mean, that's something you might notice about notes art is there's always kind of a lot of these things. There's sort of a darkness to it.
Hauntingness.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, that's where that comes from, which is one reason I think also why I was kind of attracted to Tove Jansson's work is there's a definite darkness to the Moomins, both in the drawing and the writing. So I don't know. As far as the last podcast that you recorded, that was difficult to hear, but I thought it was really interesting.
I could go on. Earlier this year, I had the experience of showing up at a guest's apartment and finding that he was dead, and that was difficult. Difficult. Well, sorry, go on. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Go on. I was trying to remember his name because I listened to that one
Michael
too.
Dennany.
Michael Dennany. Yeah.
Yeah, and that one I've recorded an hour. One day later, like I just started writing the moment I got home, and the next morning I thought, okay, this is enough. Start, hit the record button and see what comes out. And that was obviously more difficult because it was more immediate. But just 2 months before that, one of my closest friends gets diagnosed with a brain tumor, and we're figuring out the last year of his life and what that looks like. And it struck me reflecting back on the experience with Tom, which is about 14 months ago, the one that I recorded this big monologue about. What we get from sharing these experiences is, I think, more important than our need to keep things in or, subscribe to some sense of propriety about stuff. Not in the sense of, we need to open up about everything like people do on social media. But about the heavy stuff like that, the realization that other people might be going through the same thing you're going through turns out to be really important, especially when you're like me and like you, where you're working at home and your social interaction isn't what other people's is. There is a sense that, being able to hear that from other people, like the moment I had at this festival where a guy told me he was going through the same thing about our friend, that he never felt like he'd really mourned him either 3 years later. I said it in the episode. I'm like, I'm not happy you're suffering the same way I am, but I am happy that you're suffering the same way, because it meant we shared something, and it wasn't just, Gil, you're weird and an imposter of a human being, but this is what human beings go through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's something that I always forget it. And it seems like a strange thing to forget. But I mean, I kind of, my default assumption is that everything I'm dealing with, everything going on in my head, nobody else experiences that. It's just me being weird and broken. And, it's just, whatever. It happens for no reason. It doesn't mean anything. I just need to deal with it. So hearing that other people have the same insecurities, that's always been interesting to me. I think because my personal predilection is to not share any of that. I mean, I for the most part, I don't share anything really on social media. I kind of, tend to keep things in. So and especially when you're working in kind of a public art form, I think for me, there really is this balance of how much do I want to reveal? How much do I want to be dealing with my issues in public? And I don't have a solution for that.
It doesn't even have to be public. I did share that whole experience as a monologue, but the thing I told you about the oncology appointment and my vibe after, that night, or maybe a day later, I reached out to one of my past guests who's a little older than me, but got diagnosed with the same sort of leukemia at the same age, at 50. And I told him that feeling that I had of, if it just went a little bit forward and I could just stop doing all this stuff and not have to deal with the uncertainty of every 6 months. I said, do you go through that? And he's totally, yeah, 100%. I've gone through that. And he actually told me that, partly because of the anxiety about going in for the session, or for the blood test every 6 months, he's kind of put it off for the last year or two. I'm like, oh, boy. Actually, that's not cool either. So you should take care of that. I'll take care of my thing, but I'm glad we're talking to each other about this. And he said, yeah, I'm going to get off my ass and actually go for my next appointment. But yeah, that sense of just being able to share, even if it's with one person, the sharing turns out to be important. And it's something I talked about in that monologue, the fear that talking about it kills it. So yeah, balancing that stuff is also what ties into my big super question for you, which is, what's the purpose of art in your life, I guess? Because it's not that sort of connection, but...
Oh, wow.
I know. It's the big, heavy one, but, it's either art or death, and I figured we'd go with art.
I mean, for me, it's both all the time. Yeah. I don't really think in terms of purposes, I guess. At least not on a day-to-day basis. I think the purpose of art in my life is it's something that I just do by default, pretty much. I mean, most of what I do, I don't have some larger meaning in mind. It's just something that I'm doing because I want to record something. I want to experiment with something. Maybe there's something I want to say. It's really...
But that's a purpose too,
Very, very much so. Yeah. Very much so. I guess it's an interesting question because, again, you're talking about something that I think I'm, for the most part, not used to thinking in terms of. But when it comes down to that, I mean, I don't know about my purpose in art in general. I mean, that's kind of, this huge, vast thing where...
The big capital A.
Art, it takes different forms. But, I mean, I think my purpose in notes art at this point is just, I don't know, to have some sense of significance, to do things that matter to other people. It's kind of... I've thought for a while that you kind of rely on other people to let you know that you exist. I mean, it's the feedback we get from other people, the reflections of us in other people and how they react to what we do that kind of gives us a sense of who we are. And if you're not getting any of that, it's like looking into a mirror and nobody's there. I mean, you don't really have a sense of what, you might have some general sense of what you are, what you care about, but there isn't any real solidity to it. And I think doing notes art has given me a sense of solidity that I didn't have before, because I'm doing these things and people are reacting to it. And I can see that what I'm doing matters to them. And, it's not always praise. I mean, I've done a few things where people were like, oh, I didn't really like that. But I mean, it's still, it's feedback of a sort. So if I had to put a pin in it, I guess I would say that the clearest thing I have to a purpose right now, at least with notes art, is just getting a better sense of myself and how I interact with or matter to other people, and how the work that I do, this subconscious stuff that I'm kind of cranking out, what that means to other people. Because, like I said, I'm in the middle of it. I can't really tell what matters and what means anything. So doing these things that pretty much come of their own, and then having other people tell me what it means to them, I would say gives me a better sense of myself, at the risk of sounding, I don't know, hippy-dippy.
No, that's what I was wondering. That's exactly what I sort of hoped it meant, that sense of this is me in the world, and, what other people see of it is helping shape, or not even define, but,
both, I would say.
Identify, yeah, I guess.
I mean, that's the double-edged sword right there, is that, you could, if you let that go too far, you have other people defining who you are, and you don't want to do that. Right. I mean, that's, like I said, that's this balance I walk between doing things that matter to me and cranking out things that I think are going to get, 25 likes on Instagram or whatever it is. I think everything we do is kind of a balance between, we're on one side, the world's on the other. But as far as, like I said, I mean, what I'm doing with notes art, being an introvert, I've been living with myself far too long. So having other people kind of react, acknowledge the fact that I exist and the fact that what I do matters, that's a big one for me.
You got it here all the way to northern New Jersey to sit down for a conversation, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. The big question, which I always ask, and you listen to the show, so you should have been prepared for it. Who you been reading?
Oh, boy. That's all across the board.
I know, that's the toughest question of all, besides art and death. But
yeah. The most recent book that I was reading, it's by Phil Lapsley. I think he's not really a novelist. He's more of a computer scientist, but he wrote a book called Exploding the Phone. It's about the phreaking scene in the PH, the phone hacking, basically. And he kind of explores how it's about the history of the phone system. I mean, how telecommunications in America went from two phones strung together with wires, Bell originally created it, to being essentially the biggest machine on the planet. I mean, something basically the internet before there was an internet. Sure. And it's a really fascinating book. I mean, he's talking about kind of the hacker community that grew up around that, and
Captain Crunch and all that.
Captain Crunch. Yeah. You know about Captain Crunch.
Yeah. One of my favorite books somewhere back here, over there, actually, Ron Rosenbaum, this journalist and essayist, he basically did the first big article about the phreaks and back in the 70s. And
that was Esquire, right?
Yeah.
I think he even gave them he was the first one to coin the term phreak.
And maybe not that Jobs and Wozniak sort of read the article and kind of went on from there. But not that he's taking credit for Apple and everything else, but, Ron did feel like he was the guy who investigated this scene before anybody else. Yeah, But yeah, so Exploding the Phone, it's a good book.
Oh, yeah, cool. Definitely. That's funny that I don't know how many people really know about that history, but
the farther we get from it all, as somebody who's 10 years older than you, and it's all just accidents of birth, the internet, the technology we have, all these different things, when they occur in your life, when you're not born into them, a lot of these things seem completely alien. Or it's like, oh, you guys, we had vinyl back then. Yeah. Now you're into vinyl, but you're going to understand why we moved over to CDs, and then but yeah, it's and people who are older than me, there are things that they had that we had no idea about when we were growing up, because we'd already moved beyond black and white TVs that were the size of a room. But yeah, there's a sort of willful lack of, or ahistoricity, where people just don't really care anymore about where anything came from, and so it's good. I'm glad you're kind of investigating that side of things.
That's a very interesting word you used just now. Ahistoricity.
Yeah. Just that sense of not wanting or not having a sense of where we came from.
That actually, one of the other books that I've been reading recently, it's called Infinite Doom. It's by Matthew Bogart.
I saw the title somewhere.
He's really good. He was one of these people who I discovered on Mastodon. He's a graphic novelist, and there's 2 volumes in this series. I have the first one, and I have the second one sitting in my apartment. I just haven't had a chance to read it yet. Yeah. But and that again is kind of about the state of the internet in the mid to late 90s, and about the community of the web 1.0, the really simple websites and BBSs, and how that kind of sense of connection.
VAX. Oh, it was a VAX or Vox? It was the terminal system we had back in college, just in the early 90s. I think it was the VAX system.
Yeah, that was digital. God. DEC, I think.
Yeah, I'm going way back. Green text on a black
the terminals.
Screen. Yeah, man. Sorry, I'm aging or dating myself with this one, but
no, I actually I think I'm a little young to have experienced BBSs. I mean, that's the Apple II era of the 80s and the green screen terminals. Yeah. But the 90s was kind of when I came of age regarding internet communities, and that's kind of the backdrop to Infinite Doom. It's about these teenagers from various difficult backgrounds who kind of find each other using the internet, and I mean, if you're into graphic novels, I'd strongly recommend this. Yeah, exactly.
You look around this library. Yeah.
No, he's worth.
Look it up. Yeah.
I mean, just something about his drawing style. It's very spare. It's very expressive.
Did you ever think of cartooning?
Oh, definitely. I used to draw cartoons all the time when I was a kid.
But, I mean, you do this daily with notes art. You know, do you think of making a cartoon?
It's 100% crossed my mind. I mean, I've been fascinated by webcomics for a while. I just never thought I was that funny. I mean, the prospect of coming up with like something interesting or meaningful.
So comics don't have to be funny. There's always Apartment 3G. That's a
Marmaduke.
Yeah, see, you can go in those directions, and it's not funny, but I guess it's here. But yeah,
Apartment 3. That was like what, Rex Morgan, like
same thing.
Style of soap opera.
Yeah, the soap opera sort of thing. But, only because of the guest next week. Lived in Apartment 3G, and this is building in the Upper West Side. He's a cartoonist too, and I was like, Apartment 3. Surely somebody else is making this joke before I am. But I was like, every cartoonist who comes here makes a bad soap opera joke.
No, I'm sure.
but that sense of making a narrative of some kind, is that something you think about?
I've always thought about it. It's more. I mean, that's
you can't say you don't have the discipline, because you've proved over the last 2+ years you have the discipline. But
it's not about that. I know I could do it at this point, and just in terms of cranking something out, I think it's more. I've read enough webcomics to be like really picky about whether something works or whether something doesn't. And I guess what it comes down to is I really don't want to find myself drawing a webcomic that sucks, and I know that I'm going to be reading it with my sort of hyper critical eye, just kind of like, this isn't funny. And the other thing is you have to be able to, and this is something that one of the things that I don't have to do with notes art is each thing is a one-off. It's just its own thing. I don't have to worry about how that impacts the other things.
Sure.
And I guess if you're drawing something like The Far Side,
I was just going to say, you got Gary Larson as an influence too. But,
he actually, I think I even mentioned him in that blog post. I mean, he's definitely, if I was going to do anything at all, like any kind of comic, it would probably be more like The Far Side. I mean, something based on my own weird interests, and there isn't sort of an expectation of carrying story arcs. It's just, one thing at a time. But
like I said, you could have your own cow tools. That'll be the
cow tools.
He still thinks that's funny, and still nobody else in the world gets it. But anyway,
no, there was some good things that came. I think there was. One of the interesting things about that was like there are like scientific like species names that are named for things that cropped up in it, because apparently scientists are one of his major fan base.
It was a big. I don't want to say nerd, but nerd when it meant something different back in the 80s. Big following for The Far Side. But as somebody who was reading it at far too, well, I would say young, I think I was 10 years old when I came across the Far Side originally, and that
same actually
bent my brain pretty badly in a good way. So
it really, I mean, the thing about it, he made some really esoteric jokes that were. I mean, I remember reading. I think I have every book in the whole that he published in the Far Side series, and a lot of these jokes, I mean, they're kind of like cultural references to things that I didn't get, or references to television. We didn't have
an internet to go look stuff up in either.
No, exactly, we didn't. I mean, I remember reading these things, and there was clearly some sort of meaning, but the humor was very cryptic, and it's kind of funny to go back over those now, because I mean, now I actually get some of those jokes.
But yeah, it's again a weird and strange array of influences we've got, which is a good thing. But so those are your two big reading / recommendations: Exploding the Phone and Infinite Doom.
Right, for the moment now, yeah. There was another book that I guess I've been reading a lot of graphic novels lately. There was something else. It was called The Last Band on Earth by Elaine Will. She's another comics illustrator and graphic novelist who I encountered on Mastodon. And again, I don't know, I like her style a lot. I mean, it's very expressive. It's very clean. It's about this rock band that's stuck in this sort of very mysterious kind of sinister city that seems to be governed primarily by demons. And they're trying to find a way out. And every time they try to get out, there's like these monsters who are blocking their path. And I'm still working my way through that. I think I finished the first or second book, but that again is something that I'd recommend if you're interested.
You do have to remember, because you've been a guest on the show, around the end of 2024, I'm going to be hitting you up for the guest list episode where you're going to tell me what your favorite books were from the past year. So it was the episode that went up 2 weeks ago. So, just had to bear in mind, oh God, I'm part of Gil's weird fraternity of guests now.
I'll start writing them down.
I've been keeping a spreadsheet since 1989.
Wow.
Yeah. If you go to the site and do all the books I've read, you'll see how far back it goes. My first year of college.
That's amazing.
I'm embarrassed by a lot of those early ones, but most of the books now are for the show. But it's I didn't have that excuse back in 1989.
I'm always impressed by people who accumulate and manage large amounts of personal data, which might sound like a very strange thing to say.
No, that's you're talking to someone who's been doing that since he was 18.
No, I really appreciate the conviction that it takes to stick to something like that. Because I think everything we do, even if it doesn't feel like a journal, our lives are kind of like journals, like I'm sure your books kind of function as a sort of, I don't know, the image I have in mind is like rings on the tree.
Yeah, and to a degree, there's that aspect of it. Who was I in, that year when I was reading this book? Before Amazon and all that, there was also, where did I get this book? And it's the same thing with comics. Where was I when I bought this issue of the X-Men when I was a kid? Or, this particular, the Thomas Pynchon novel, the first time I read V. I know exactly the bookstore I was in wasn't Wallingford, Pennsylvania. Crown Books, blah, blah, blah. We could associate those things. Now everything just shows up at our door. And again,
exactly.
in that ahistoricity sense that I mentioned, we lose a lot when everything's virtual like that, where before we had to go somewhere and do something. So balancing that with, becoming a goddamned old man has been part of my ongoing experience here on the show. So.
That's a really interesting point. I've heard the same thing said about music, that, a lot of the music fans, like people who actually know music, especially older ones, they'll tell you about the record stores that they went to, and they would make like a pilgrimage to the record store every Saturday, and they knew all the sales, and they can tell you where they were the first time they heard a certain artist. And I didn't even grow up with the concept of albums. My first real I know. But again, it's just an died a little inside when I said that.
It's not even you goddamn kids. It's just, I happen to be born in 71. You happen to be born in 81. And,
certainly, there's a generational difference that might contribute to that. I was also homeschooled, so I didn't go to high school where people had albums and they were sharing CDs. I kind of came of age in more like the Napster era where, I heard songs on the radio. I knew songs that I liked. So I've always been kind of more in the, my music experience has been, I'd say, primarily digital and primarily individual songs. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting to me to hear what it was to actually experience an album in a place, to ascribe a certain time and place to music when everything kind of gets flattened out now. It's just, something on a screen.
Right. Yeah. It's one of my favorite episodes I did was with a music writer and musician and writer and producer, a guy named Gary Clark, and he was in a band called Danny Wilson. And I pitched him, and we eventually connected when he was going to be in New York to record something. And I told him I was 16 years old in a Caldor department store over the border of New York State when I heard the big single from Danny Wilson on the radio or on the audio, and I thought, this song just entered my soul. I have to go find this album, and boom, that was it. We have those instances of things like that are, like you said, everything's sort of flattened and turned into, whatever's streaming or whatever's a background now. But again, we're getting old, so I'm glad you're making an art. You're making art in a form that, takes some of that and you turn out something, we'll say permanent. Yeah. As permanent as things get.
It's I was certainly permanent. It's maybe more permanent than something in physical medium because it can be backed up everywhere. Electronic things, I think, live on in a way that maybe drawings don't.
We'll take that as a sign that we're going to keep going through time after we're gone. So
I like to think that way.
Which again is me and my death fetish. But I figure we got something in common.
I can identify.
And that was Chris Silverman. go check out his notes art work every day. It's on Instagram, Mastodon, and Glass, where he goes by C. Silverman, all one word, the letter C for Chris. Also, check out the site notes.art for every post or every one of the images, as well as Chris's blog and a neat About page. His designer/coding site is just csilverman.com, if that interests you, but that's not really, the art stuff. And thanks again to Jen Silverman for connecting us and realizing we were going to have a good, probably long conversation. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Just let them know this podcast comes out every week with really interesting conversations with fascinating, creative people. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or internet art or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. You can do that by email, by postcard or letter. You can also do it by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you're going to go longer than that, just call back, leave a second message. Oh, and let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with the listeners, but I would never include something like that without the speaker's permission, so let me know. If you got money to spare, don't give it to me. I mean, it's always nice to have somebody reward this whole thing that I do, but that's why I have a job. Really, just give to other people and give to institutions in need. You can give to people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, and all those different crowdfunding platforms where you can help people out with medical bills or car payments or rent or getting an artistic project off the ground or whatever it is. With institutions, I give to my local food bank every month, make occasional contributions to my grad school, sometimes the Poor People's Campaign. I make targeted election contributions, but that's because I'm a lobbyist by day. But there are all sorts of things you can do, like freedom funds, election funds, Planned Parenthood and Women's Choice, the things you can do with your money to try to build a better world. So, I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.